Okay, it looks like numbers have sort of stabilised, so let's kick off. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the third in the series of Biodiversity Net Gain clinics. My name is Richard Lancashire, and I'm from the Future Homes Hub. With these clinics, we've had really positive feedback from the previous two clinics that we've had on biodiversity gain metric, and then the second one was about the how to achieve BNG on-site. So we're really pleased to be hosting this third session, which is focused at off-site BNG. So with the hub, what we've been doing, we've worked with colleagues from across the sector to try to resolve the challenges that the new home building sector's addressing. We do this through our membership organisation, really through working with developers, the largest and the very smallest developers, with experts across the industry, to try to support people in resolving the challenges ahead of us in our environmental and sustainability roadmap. And obviously, biodiversity net gain is a critical area on our path. And so what we've been doing with these clinics is sort of recognising that there's almost a disparity in the knowledge base from different members, particularly those with large organisations that have the capacity and the expertise, are actually quite well versed in what's happening about BNG. Some of the smaller developers have really been identifying that they're just lacking that knowledge, hence the reason for setting up these clinics, where we bring together a panel of experts to just answer your questions. So I'm very pleased to introduce today our panel of experts. We've got Nick White, so Dr. Nick White from Natural England. Nick's the principal advisor there, working with developing and securing environmental net gain outcomes, both biodiversity and natural capital. Nick has been a good friend of ours and actually been working on the panel for the last 3 of these clinics as well. So thank you very much, Nick, and welcome. We've got Emma Tuvey, who's a Chief Ecology Officer for Environment Bank. Emma is our trained ecologist on the panel with over 18 years of ecological consulting experience. But at Environment Bank, she's responsible for driving the outcomes for nature across the Environment Bank's portfolio of nature recovery sites. And lastly, we've got Nicola. So Nicola Johansson, who's the Group Head of Biodiversity at Redrow. Nicola is a sustainability manager with over 20 years of experience developing and implementing sustainability and environmental strategies in business. So as well as being the group's business biodiversity lead, Nicola works with sustainability strategy, public reporting and resource efficiency programs. So that's our panel today. And we've got quite a straightforward format where really it's over to you. So Nicola is going to start with just a brief presentation just to introduce the topic. And as I said, the topic today is about delivering biodiversity offsite. So Nicola is going to do a presentation, and then please just send in your questions. So please use the Q&A function, which you'll see at the bottom of the screen, and ask your questions, and we'll put those to the panel and we'll see how we go. We didn't have any pre-questions, so I've got a blank sheet of paper, so don't be shy, just pop in your questions as they come in, and we'll see how we run it after that. Okay, so Nicola, if you're ready, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Richard. I'll just share my screen and we'll kick off. Okay. Can you give me a thumbs up, Richard, if you can see that okay? Great stuff. Okay. Thanks. Good morning, everybody. And thanks, Future Homes Hub, for inviting me to be part of the panel today. As Richard said, I'm Nicola Johansson, Group Biodiversity Manager at Redrow. I've been involved in this agenda for quite some time now. So what I'm going to do really, as Richard said, is a short introduction, set the scene around biodiversity net gain offsite, and then open the floor to questions. It's quite a complex area, so I expect we're going to have quite a lot of questions on this, and still some unknowns in there as well. So it'd be good to get your questions and have a good discussion. Okay, so just to kick off then, I just thought it was useful really to remind ourselves why we're doing all of this. Really, I find that sometimes for myself it's easy to get caught up in the numbers and the processes and the legalities around biodiversity net gain, which are all really important. But for me, I think it's good to kind of just keep sight of the end game really, and what we're trying to do is develop land in a way that contributes to nature's recovery which we probably all know is desperately needed. And we're trying to do that by making improvements that are measurable to biodiversity. And previous clinics have talked about how the metric works. And the way that we do this, the kind of overarching principles for doing this are around the mitigation hierarchy. So looking at avoiding and minimising impacts on biodiversity in the first place, where we can, enhancing existing biodiversity, so looking at existing habitats on site and how we can find ways to enhance those on the development site. And then once we've looked at those two, then thinking about how we create new areas of biodiversity on site, which I know has been the subject of a previous one of these clinics. And then if we can't do those things, we then think about creating new areas of biodiversity off-site in various different ways. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And I've put as a last resort, so it's the bottom bit on the hierarchy, really. So I think it's just useful to kind of remind ourselves about the hierarchy and where this sits within that hierarchy. Okay, so in terms of thinking about options for achieving biodiversity net gain then, so the first option on the left there is delivery on site, which I've just mentioned in the hierarchy. So can we deliver biodiversity net gain on the development site itself, retaining existing habitats, enhancing habitats, and potentially creation of new habitats on site? And this front end of the hierarchy, if you like, is emphasised as a preferred option in the policy for biodiversity net gain as well. And we'll talk about in a minute about how achievable that may or may not be on different sites, but for many new developments, delivering BNG is possible on site, but not always. So that's when we come to the next step in the middle there, where we're looking at off-site. So if we can't deliver for various different reasons our biodiversity net gain on site, then we have options for delivering it off-site. And there are really kind of a couple of reasons, two main kind of umbrella reasons why we wouldn't be able to deliver on site. Firstly, because of site constraints, which I'll talk about later on in a little bit more detail. And secondly, we might be trying to deliver something quite ecologically more technical, if you like, and we can't deliver that on site, or it's not appropriate ecologically to deliver what we need to deliver on site. So it's a best ecological option to go off site. So a couple of main reasons there. And as I say, I'll talk about some of the kind of site constraints that we've encountered as an organisation shortly. So in terms of off-site then, so there are a couple of options here if we need to go off-site. So that is looking at either separate land holdings that we have or the landowners we're working with have, usually quite close to the development, or via third parties. So third-party landowners or local NGOs, farmers, or even the local authority as well. So a mix of players in the market that will be providing offsets for biodiversity net gain. And Emma is going to talk shortly on a little bit more around the detail of the different players in the market after I've finished my section. So that's on-site and off-site, and they can be achieved in combination. So it can be 100% achieved on-site, off-site, or through a combination of on-site and off-site measures, as it says on the slide as well. And all significant on-site biodiversity net gains and all off-site biodiversity net gains must be secured for 30 years as part of the legal process. So that's the left-hand side of the slide, and on the right-hand side are statutory credits. So there are going to be some schemes where it's not possible to achieve biodiversity net gain on site, and where appropriate off-site locations or offsets aren't available in order to deliver the shortfall. So in these cases, the developer can then go and purchase statutory credits from government. And as it says, actually it doesn't say on the slide, but it's an option of last resort. So once we've exhausted trying those other options on the left there, then we can go and look for statutory credits. So So these credits I'm going to talk about in a little bit more detail on the next slide, but they're going to be issued by Natural England, aren't yet available, but will be once BNG is mandatory in January. And as it says on the slide, they're delivered through landscape scale strategic habitat creation across the UK, and perhaps we can talk about that a little bit more later on. Just a little note about language, which I think is quite important. So you can see in brackets, it says units on the on-site and off-site. So that's referring to biodiversity units, and statutory credits are something different. So units are basically what the DEFRA metric operates in. And credits are very different. Credits are actually statutory credits that are purchased from government. So just a little note around language, which is sometimes a little bit confused, I think. Okay, so just a little bit more about the statutory credit process before we talk a little bit more about off-site. So as I've just mentioned, statutory credits are last resort option for developers if we're unable to kind of get delivery on site or buy off-site units. The prices are deliberately set high to ensure that they don't compete with the development of the private market. And Natural England will be running the statutory credit sales platform on behalf of the Secretary of State. So credit sales revenue will be received by Natural England, and that then reinvested in the strategic habitat creation and enhancement. And the aim of that is delivering kind of long-term environmental benefits and aligning those projects with local nature recovery priorities nationally as well. In terms of buying the statutory credits, a spatial risk multiplier applies, and that's included in the metric. So essentially, developers must buy two statutory credits for every one biodiversity needed in the metric. And I believe that the statutory metric, when it's released, will be able to automatically calculate that as well. So there'll be an add-on on the metric that will do that calculation. So essentially 2 for 1. And DEFRA published indicative prices for statutory credits early this year, and I put a link to the website there that you'll be able to kind of click on once these resources go out after the session. Prices are tiered, so they depend on the habitat that is required to be purchased, and those prices kind of basically are reflecting the cost of delivering those different habitats. So the more difficult or valuable those habitats are, the higher the cost. And they range from £42,000 to £650,000 per credit, depending on the type of habitat. So kind of lower value habitats, if you like, or obviously at the cheaper end. And they're indicative prices at the moment, and confirmed prices will be published when biodiversity net gain becomes mandatory in January. Okay, so coming back to purchase of offsets. So if we can't deliver on site and we need to buy some offsite units, then all of those biodiversity units that are offered, all offsite units, must be registered on a national register, and that register will again be administered by Natural England. And the aim of the register is just to record these offsite allocations and make that information publicly available to provide some transparency for which sites are delivering offsite gains. Net gains, land must, sorry, I just lost my thread a little bit there. So land must be registered, otherwise it can't be used for offsets. And land must be registered before it's allocated to a project or a developer as well. And it's a legal requirement that that land is registered before the LPA sign off that agreement with the developer. It's important to note that the register isn't about checking the quality or the suitability of the offsets. It's a place where we're registering these offsets for transparency, essentially. So for those biodiversity units that are included on the register, there's a couple of requirements for them to be registered. So they must be delivered under a kind of legally binding, either a conservation covenant or a planning obligation, so a 106 agreement. And those legal agreements must obviously set out that there'll be an enhancement of the land for conservation, and that those units will be available for purchase for planning permissions. And then the legal agreement must also require the landowner to maintain that land for a minimum of 30 years, which I touched on earlier. So the register is going to be part of the secondary legislation that's released. And I've said it will be administered by Natural England. And as far as I'm aware, that from what I've read, that there'll be a determination time set by government for applications. And from what I've read so far, it's likely to be around 6 weeks. So perhaps, Nick, you can pick up on that later if there's anything new around that, or if you need to correct that. Just to note for developers as well, so you probably talked about in the previous clinics that developers can sell excess biodiversity units from their developments into the market. So they use the register in the same way as everyone else. So we can only sell these excess units if we've registered them on the national register, subject to all the same requirements, so the legal agreements and the 30 years as well. So I just thought I'd talk a little bit about our experience at Red Rose so far, where we're at in terms of thinking about offsets. It's fairly early days for us. So we've been working on biodiversity net gain for a couple of years. And I would say in the last kind of 12 months, we've had some interaction looking at needing offsets because of local plan authority requirements. As a business, our intention and our preference is in line with the mitigation hierarchy and in line with the legal requirements is to deliver BNG on site wherever we can. It's just really important to note that we're really mindful of trying to make sure that what we deliver on site is realistic and achievable as well. And for various different reasons, it's not always possible to deliver 100% of the 10% net gain that we needed on the development side. So at the moment, we've got fairly early days, but at present about 70% of our developments going through planning are achieving 10% on site. That might change as we get more experience and we perhaps get better at doing it. We're still learning how to do this. We're still learning what works well and what doesn't work quite so well. So we're still finding our way through it. But about 30% of our developments are requiring offsets where they're trying to achieve 10% BNG. And there are 4 kind of key factors that we are driving that need to deliver offsets, really. Firstly, where we've got smaller sites. So around about, I mean, it varies really, but around anything less than 6 hectares for us is proving somewhat difficult to deliver on site. It's important, though, that none of these are hard and fast rules. So there are some small sites where we've delivered BNG on site as well. So it depends on lots of different complex factors. But as a rule, you know, we are aware that smaller sites might be more difficult for us as part of our processes. Where we've got certain baseline habitat sites that are a bit nicer in value, if you like, and in particular, we're finding grasslands that haven't been kind of fully improved for agriculture, so they're fairly nice-ish grasslands. Sorry, Emma, that wasn't very technical ecological terminology. But they are likely to make it more difficult for us to achieve BNG if we can't retain the vast majority of them. And the area of them obviously drives a little bit of that difficulty. There tends to be a larger area of the development. And then where there's a need for whatever reason through planning for a higher allocation of homes on the development, or we've got less space for POS, and obviously that is a limiting factor. And there are other constraints sometimes that come into play. So where we've got easements, for example, across the development, or where there's a particular need for sports pitches or other facilities that don't lend themselves to biodiversity net gain. then that can make it more difficult for us. So quite a few of these factors are known very early on in the process for us. So, you know, we've got internal processes where our land teams are kind of doing really early high-level assessments of BNG to kind of manage that risk as early as possible and to understand what the difficulties might be around BNG for us. And then just a little brief section on challenges around offsets. Really, again, it's early days. We don't have tons of experience yet. We're gaining experience month by month, and we've got a few schemes that vary in different stages of trying to secure offsets or having had secured offsets at the moment. There have been limited options for us, I would say, so far for identifying additional land holdings around our developments. And I think that will probably change over time as when new land comes through with BNG requirements on them, that will probably be factored into the outline permissions much earlier on. So I think this is all there's a little bit of a movable feast. So certainly we're looking at that in terms of our option sites, obviously. But where we've had to identify private providers and try to secure offsets, we are finding it fairly challenging for a number of different reasons, really. There's been a lack of certainty, really, around availability of offsets to us. So we might be talking to different players who say, well, yeah, we've got some, and it's uncertain whether they actually exist or they're going to exist in the time frame in which we need them. So a little bit of lack of certainty around when these offsets will be delivered. Lots of players in the market, so lots of people kind of approaching us, but questions for us around, you know, can they deliver for us? Are their sites going to be ready to go in time for us? And we are seeing a little bit of lack of certainty from landowners, causing a bit of a reluctance to commit at the moment. So they're interested in it, but not quite sure on some of the ramifications and consequences for them. So there is definitely uncertainty where we've had conversations and they're not ready to go yet. So I think it's just representative of where we are really in terms of the majority of the market at the moment. And then a big piece of work, we've got kind of a draft kind of offset strategy for the business with lots of questions in it, really. So, you know, how do we know if these providers are legitimate? It's really difficult for us at the moment to ascertain the performance because it is so new. There aren't kind of accreditation schemes for providers. And in some cases, you know, larger sums of money are involved in this. So definitely an issue for us in finding our way through who's out there and the quality of what's being delivered. What I haven't mentioned is that the DEFRA metric actually penalises offsets that are further away from the development, if you like. So it has a set of multipliers the further away you are for delivering offsets away from the site. So we have had in practice local authorities requiring us to deliver offsets quite close to the site. So a little bit of kind of, I don't know about conflict, but a little bit, again, emerging policy there. LPAs really pushing us to deliver locally, which obviously is limiting what might be available to us in terms of offsets. So yeah, lots for us to think about, really, you know, in terms, you know, not just availability and price, but the deliverability, the experience, ecological expertise, how the site will be managed for 30 years. What then, you know, who's going to assess and validate the baseline, for example, as well as all the financial due diligence. So quite a lot in there for us to kind of get our heads around. And we're currently, I've just put on here just for interest, really, we're currently paying an average price of around 25,000 per biodiversity unit. I think that probably set to rise from what we can tell. Okay, so that's just a bit of a whistle-stop tour through offsets. Just a very brief summary. Thinking about biodiversity net gain as part of this mitigation hierarchy. So this on-site stuff comes a little bit later on. there are clear, genuine reasons why achieving 10% on site may not be possible and won't be possible for many developments. In that case, we can secure off-site units through various different mechanisms. These must be publicly registered, legally secured for 30 years. Few challenges for us: availability, timeframes, landowner uncertainty, deciding who we deal with. And as a last resort, we can purchase these statutory credits that I talked about with the indicative prices published by DEFRA recently. So that's it from me. I'll hand over to you, Emma, just to pick up the point on the offset providers, if that's okay. Thanks.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Nicola. That was a brilliant overview. So yeah, I'm Emma Tuvia. I work for Environment Bank. So we're essentially an off-site provider of biodiversity units. What we do is we're developing a network of sites all across England currently, so that there is full coverage for every developer to have an off-site option to purchase biodiversity units locally. And Nicola explained brilliantly that sort of need to deliver as locally as possible. In the biodiversity metric, if you deliver outside your local authority area or your natural character area where your development sits, then the biodiversity metric starts to penalise you. So as long as you're either on site or within your local authority jurisdiction or within your natural character jurisdiction, you're sort of not penalised at all. In fact, you're rewarded for delivering locally. So what we're offering at Environment Bank, and we're one type of offset provider, and I was going to go through, I've kind of categorised them into 4, which I thought was quite a simple way of looking at them, but we're one kind of operator. So what we're called a habitat bank provider, and the way I look at it is that we offer oven-ready units. So everything that is, it's quite a complicated journey. You do need expertise to develop biodiversity units from a project. So at Environment Bank, we have a big team of ecologists, we have a big team of lawyers, we have a big team of land agents, and all of those sort of technical aspects of delivering offsite are kind of covered in-house. So a developer can come to an operator like us and buy biodiversity units off the shelf from projects that have delivery certainty, and in many cases they've already started on the ground, they're already secured through Section 106 agreement, and all of those kind of legal and financial burdens for that offsite delivery are kind of decoupled from the transaction itself. A habitat bank provider like that can usually offer fractions of units, so it's really relevant, you know, for this audience. A lot of smaller developers, smaller sites, you actually only need a small number of units, and that can be quite difficult to secure from some of these other providers in the market. But a habitat bank provider is essentially pooling resources from multiple developers, and they're delivering a single site. So we can sell half a unit, 1 unit, and that's not a problem for us. But that is challenging for some of the other providers. A habitat bank provider like us can also support with inputting into your documents for your planning applications, and supporting some of your LPA engagement activities as well to smooth that planning process for you. So it's a slick operation. It's a kind of risk-free, pay and skip away kind of offer on the table for developers. The other offset provider kind of categories I'll quickly go through now. So of course, and Nicola touched on, you can do direct delivery with a landowner. Now this essentially means, of course, that a developer comes together and has a direct negotiation with a landowner. Typically, in most circumstances, that landowner won't have the kind of ecological expertise, so you would need to draw on that. You might need to bring in an ecological consultant. You certainly need to bring in some lawyers into the room, and you need to go through a bit of an onboarding journey with your landowner to see if what you need for your offsetting is actually deliverable on that land. And it's generally a bit of a longer process, and Nicola sort of touched on that already. That that it can be quite complex, and not landowners aren't necessarily going to be ready on day one for you to buy your units and for you to walk away. It's a bit more of an involved process, and typically it's not worth a landowner's while to do a half a unit biodiversity unit for you. It's usually a kind of a bigger requirement that would make that kind of transaction worthwhile. We also have you'll see emerging a lot of brokerage type models out there. Essentially, they're a middleman between your developer and your direct delivery model. A brokerage will aggregate lots of landowners that are really interested in delivering biodiversity net gain. They might not have progressed really with too much in terms of what they're going to deliver on site, lots of opportunity to flex and design something that you need as a developer, but probably not that far progressed down the line. You can go to a broker, they can help you find a site that's the right size, the right sort of type that you need, and they may even also help you handhold you through that kind of onboarding process and support with some of the maybe ecological and legal expertise. But of course there'd be a cost associated with that you as the developer would need to pay, and then they will take a cut of that negotiated deal price for facilitating that arrangement. So that's the brokerage model. We are actually seeing some local authorities starting to operate in this space. They're aggregating information from landowners within the local authority area and sort of essentially having an online dating app type approach where a developer can go in and see if they can find a landowner to work with. The final category, which I'm calling joint venture or options model. So there are some operators out there at the moment that are proactively looking to find land where a landowner's keen to deliver biodiversity net gain on that land. They'll do some very, very high level initial due diligence around some of the legal aspects, around some of the ecology. They might not even go to site or do any assessment work, but some high level kind of desktop due diligence around whether it might be a suitable site for biodiversity net gain. And then what they do is they secure the land through an option. Now, I'm sure a lot of the people in this audience will understand what an option is, but usually it's a high level agreement where there's still a lot of questions and there's still a lot of kind of detailed negotiations to happen, but at least there's a level of certainty around whether that land is going to be sort of available and secure for BNG in the future. In those circumstances, the developer can go through this operator, find semi-secured land, and it's then down to a more similar to a direct delivery model where you go through a process of negotiation to agree what that deal looks like. In some circumstances, you may already have those option models may have already been triggered because of one single transaction from a developer that's kind of kick-started that BNG project, and then it can operate a bit more like a habitat banking model where they may not be reliant on the single sale to for that project to go ahead. And that means that smaller unit sales may be possible under those kind of joint venture options models. But typically they're, again, bigger sized unit needs for those. That's a really sort of short nutshell there. I think any questions around some of those models, I'm really happy to explore. There's everything in between as well, so I have simplified it into those 4 categories, but really happy to take more questions if it's helpful.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Emma, and thank you, Nicola. Excellent introduction to the topic, and as you predicted, there's loads of questions. And they're covering an awful lot of different things, so we'll try to cover them. For those that might have spotted it, Nick's actually been very active answering a number of these as well. So if you click on the Q&A, you'll see some of the answered queries as well. So and we might get a chance to jump to some of those later as well. But let me start off. I think there's a couple. Yeah, let's start off with the first one by Stuart, actually. And I think, Nick, it sort of was aimed at you, and by David Baxter. So question here, keen to hear everybody's views. what liabilities arise to project suppliers and developers who have used units from an offsite BNG? Nick.
Short answer is none. So essentially, when you're delivering offsite, it's the liability transfers to the landowner to deliver that. There are variations of that where if you're going through a third party, such as a broker or something like that, they may take on the liability on behalf of the landowner, but the developer doesn't hold that liability. It becomes the responsibility of the landowner or their contractors to deliver the outcomes that they have committed to deliver. I don't know if Emma or Nicola want to add.
Yeah, I would just add to that. That is true in most cases. I think the only where you have a bespoke offset for a particular development, sometimes a local authority will require the developer to become a signatory to the Section 106 as well as the landowner. That can be negotiated away in some situations, but we are seeing some local authorities, if the whole offset is purely for one developer, some of the liability may still sit with them through the Section 106 agreement. So it just depends on what you're able to negotiate with the LPA and the landowner themselves.
Yeah, I think there's also, well, also might not be a legal liability. There's clearly sort of reputational risk as well. And I know the larger developers have been working together. Nicola, you've been involved with groups as well, thinking about sort of quality assurance as well. Do you want to sort of add any more about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big area for us to think about. You know, clearly we're trying to deliver on site where we can, but where we're having to deliver offsets, we have internally, we've got a kind of working group looking at managing agents at the moment. So where we're delivering on site, looking at getting the right managing agents, the right level agreements with them, the right partners, I suppose, really, to ensure kind of that legacy of that on-site delivery. As Nick says, for the off-site units, we do pass that legal responsibility, but we do, you know, there is a due diligence for us in terms of thinking about obviously the financial kind of risk around the business that we're dealing with, but lots and lots of ecological questions really that we need to satisfy ourselves that it's good quality offset, it's going to be delivered, it's going to be managed for the long term. And I think, you know, there are quite a few difficult, because of the market at the moment, it's still developing. We have less choice at the moment of who to select, but so I think that will evolve with time, where we'll become a little bit more kind of, we'll be able to tick more boxes on what we'd like to achieve really in terms of thinking about quality of those offsets, you know, from a reputational perspective for us really.
Excellent, thank you.
Could I just add to that?
Emma,
I think that's such a great point, Nicola, and I think what we are seeing as well is our local authorities are really keen to see, of course, that high quality delivery off-site. And there is also a risk to developers that if they go down a journey at the point where they're looking to get their gain plan approved to discharge their biodiversity net gain condition before they can get the spade in the ground, that if that quality can't be demonstrated by the offset provider, there is a real risk there that won't be approved, and therefore, you know, there could be delays to your program and commencing on site. So they're not only from a kind of good for nature perspective look at the quality, but there is a planning risk there if you cannot demonstrate that quality is being delivered.
Okay, thank you. All right, the next question is about, I think you touched on it, about the sort of spatial multiplier in your piece, Emma, but it says from Stuart, so given the recent experience, I don't know what that was, but anyway, how does the panel think LPAs can be guided / influenced to adopt or accept spatial risk multipliers, and specifically delivery outside of the local planning authority area? Emma, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, I think Nick probably also be good to hear his views on this. So Nicola's talked about the mitigation hierarchy, the spatial hierarchy already. It is important that wherever possible you try, and it's a core principle of ecology really, is to try and mitigate and offset impacts as close to that impact as possible. But the reality is, particularly in this very nascent market, is that there aren't local options. And And the way the metric is designed is, yes, to incentivize local delivery, but certainly isn't to preclude it at all. And in fact, it enables delivery of mitigation beyond the local authority and even at that national level. So whilst it's a preference, it's not a kind of clear no. And the big question, I think, and from Nick would be great to have an answer, is I don't think local authorities will be able to say no to, or, you know, cross-boundary delivery if you can demonstrate that you've exhausted those local options. And I think that's the principle behind how it will work in practice. Is that how you would see it, Nick? Will there be a local ability to kind of preclude cross-boundary selling?
So what you've set out, Emma, is correct in terms of that. You know, the way it's intended to work is the incentive to encourage delivery locally. We are aware of instances where planning authorities, or even instances where ward councillors have said, individual councillors said, it has to be in my ward, let alone the kind of wider planning authority area, or where in other authorities they really don't mind and they're quite happy to see delivery happen elsewhere. To some extent, it may depend on what's in the local plan, but crucially, I think it will also depend on what gets published by DLUC as an update to planning practice guidance on this as well. So we are anticipating that. I haven't seen it, so I don't know what it says. And it's obviously not available yet, but one of the things it will try and explore is to what extent a local authority is able to set some additional parameters around net gain or not locally to that area. So, I think it's a kind of watch this space at the moment, but in the meantime, just be aware in some authorities there is a political dimension to this as well, where for understandable reasons, local councillors want to try and retain delivery locally. But I think, as you said, Emma, if you can demonstrate you've tried to do that, but are unable to, then that ought to give you, good reasons as to why then you can go further afield, and absolutely you can do that and calculate that through the metric. The only thing is you can't go out of England basically, but within England you can in theory go anywhere.
Very clear. Thank you, Nick. There's a couple of questions here about the responsible bodies, and I don't think we've really talked too much about responsible bodies today yet. But so there's a question asking if there's going to be a national register of approved responsible bodies, and one which I'm going to have to paraphrase, but I can't find it in the depths of these. Oh, here we go. Does the panel think the current lack of responsible bodies will affect offsite BNG? There's a bit more text to it, but essentially that's the summary. So I'll probably go back to you, Nick, about just the sort of if there is a register of responsible bodies, how that can work.
So yeah, we are. My understanding is that the Secretary of State, so you have to apply to the Secretary of State to become a responsible body. My understanding is the Secretary of State will publish information about who is responsible bodies for people struggling to find that. That's because there currently are none, as one of the questions is alluding to. As to whether this will have an impact on biodiversity net gain in the currently, obviously these are for conservation covenants, and conservation covenants are a new legal mechanism that are enabled through the Environment Act, but it's not the only mechanism. You can also use Section 106 agreements, and if you talk to a lot of lawyers, there's a lot of they're very familiar with Section 106, as are planning authorities. They are by default, by the fact there's none of them, not familiar at all with conservation covenants. So I think for a long time it's likely there's going to be a kind of legal preference towards Section 106 until people get more familiar with conservation covenants as they come through. So not expecting it to be a major issue, but I would defer to Nicola and Emma to see if they have a counter view on that.
I would agree with you, Nick. I would say at the moment, local authorities, they're comfortable with Section 106 agreements. The lawyers involved are very familiar with them, and that is something that we're freely sort of negotiating at the moment on many of our sites. The responsible body and conservation covenant approach will be great. It will give more options, but it's the absence of it, or the sort of nascent nature of it at the moment, isn't causing us any challenges. But I think it will be great when there are other options on the table. Nicola, I don't know if you've got anything to add.
I don't. I agree with what you've both said. Really, we haven't seen, all of our agreements are going through Section 106s at the moment. not seeing any kind of blockage around that at all. So I agree with what you said.
There was a question: is there any other progress on, or what's the progress on conservation covenants? But I don't know if there's anything we can add now to that question. Is there?
I don't think much more to add. I mean, there's the information has been published about them. That there's an application process to apply for organisations to apply to become responsible bodies. But as I indicated, at the moment, as far as I know, that no one has yet kind of become a responsible body for biodiversity net gain. I'm sure that will change over time. And as Emma said, there are some advantages to using conservation covenants over Section 106s, but I think it will take a while for people to start to test them, become legally familiar and comfortable with them, and then we'll see what happens to them over the coming years.
Okay. Next question on statutory credits, actually, and this might be a bit hypothetical because we haven't done this yet, but how would a developer prove they've exhausted all other options before they're allowed to access statutory credits?
So it's a perfectly good question for two reasons. Firstly, a developer will, if they feel they've they need to go to statutory credits, they'll need to be able to demonstrate to the planning authority that they can do. And equally, we don't want a scenario, going back to the earlier question about what planning authorities can and cannot do, where a planning authority can turn around and deny someone if they've made all efforts. So we are expecting guidance from government that will set out quite clearly what a developer would need to do, and I would expect it, I don't know this for certain, but I would expect it to be some sort of providing evidence that you have sought to approach Habitat Bank or other kind of offset providers, or there's nothing on the register, for example, as your evidence as to why you need to go to statutory credit. So it will set out clearly in the guidance, I think, what you need to provide, and then if you can demonstrate that, then you can legitimately go to purchase statutory credits.
Yeah, and they're expensive anyway, so we're gonna exhaust all those options.
Yeah.
Can you said it was double as well? So for every unit you need to procure 2 credits?
Yeah, so it's essentially because almost by default, I guess, if you've gone to statutory credits, the assumption is it means that there's nothing available locally. And the way statutory credits work is government will then invest in landscape scale restoration projects somewhere across England. So you don't know where your money is being invested. Your project could be in Cornwall, for example, the investment could be going in Cumbria. So basically it's applying an average of the spatial risk multiplier as you would normally apply it within the kind of the market as well, to account for that.
Okay, thank you. Here's one, I think, Nicola, definitely for you to answer. So how do you go about searching for offsite unit providers?
Yeah, it would be great to have a central resource to do that, but we don't have that at the moment. So essentially we're doing it on a local basis. Our land and planning teams we've obviously got lists of who the main players are nationally. We're starting to create lists who the main kind of players are kind of in the local context for our different divisions across the country, engaging with land agents, etc. So a mix of things. So it's a real mixture of a process at the moment. But clearly our land teams are very well kind of connected up with land agents across the area. So yeah, at the moment, it's kind of an ad hoc process. I don't know if you want to say something, Richard, about the search, the Future Homes Hub search.
Well, that's a nice feed in. But again, thanks, Nicola. It's something we've again recognised, just speaking with members of the hub, that there isn't a clear. Well, there's lots of people offering services to say what land is available in the area. So what we've created is just a sort of a matchmaking tool, really, just allowing landowners, providers, agents, and obviously and other land banks just to register their units with us. We'll post it, make it freely available, and then so people can see what land is available in the area, and then can just click on and contact the person who's proposing to sell units. It's really just an introductory service. It's, as I said, freely available to members, and trying to just gain more transparency in the market. So hopefully that will be launched very shortly, and hopefully support some of those queries you've got.
Yeah, it'd be really useful.
Brilliant. Okay. I think we touched before about standards for habitat bank. Well, the question is, will there be national standards for habitat banks to adhere to? I say we touched it. I think we were talking about it just before we started this conversation, actually. Emma, do you want to sort of expand on that?
Yeah, so I mean, there are no current standards specifically for off-site habitat banks currently, and I think that is something that's lacking in the market. There's quite a lot of guidance though around biodiversity net gain generally, and a lot of those sort of principles, if you like, should apply both to on-site and off-site, and particularly around how the ecology needs to work. That there's a reasonable amount of information around how biodiversity net gain should be calculated and delivered on the ground. There's lots coming out of the Chartered Institute for Ecology and Environmental Management, SIEM, for example. There's the British standards around BNG, so lots of principles around that. But I think what's lacking at the moment is particularly guidance around governance. And that sort of delivery certainty element of off-site biodiversity net gain, particularly around funding, how projects are funded and secured, and people can't run off with the money to Barbados, and then the biodiversity never gets delivered on the ground. Those kinds of risks, and the sort of rigor around the agreements that are in place that ensure that the outcomes for nature that have been promised are actually delivered. I think it's those elements that are a bit lacking at the moment. At Environment Bank, we obviously position ourselves as a high integrity option in the market, and have been looking to sort of publish some high level information about what we think good habitat banking looks like. But I don't know if there's anything coming out from government on that, Nick, whether there's an expectation of that sort of being put forward.
Yeah, so as Emma said, there is an existing British standard for biodiversity net gain, which is a process standard, and there are aspects of that are of potential relevance to anyone providing biodiversity units. So that's BS 8683. There is a wider strand of work happening with the British Standards Institute, because there is obviously this market for biodiversity units is just one of an emerging kind of set of environmental markets in across the UK. There's stuff on nutrients, stuff on water quality, etc. So there is work that's been commissioned by government through the British Standards Institute to try and create a kind of more of a framework, particularly looking at questions, as Emma's alluded to, around governance, the financial aspects, etc. So make sure that you're dealing with a sort of a competent, legitimate organisation as well. So in the meantime, as I think Nicola made the point earlier, do ensure you do undertake your own due diligence on some of this. And then Natural England is also starting a pilot, working with bodies like House Builders Federation, Landscape Institute, SIEM and others, which will be a kind of quality assurance pilot to look at what are the gaps out there as well, and is there a role that either we and others or others could potentially play as well to help make sure this everyone's delivering to the best standard. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you. I've got a question here on stacking, which, to be honest, I think there's only one question on stacking. I was expecting a few more, but there's one. In order to stack BNG and phosphate offset, does it matter which order and how it is presented to Natural England? I think, Nick.
Can I take that one away,
Okay.
Richard, if you could, because it's a great question and I want to make sure I give the right answer to it as well. So I'm very happy to answer it. I just need to defer to a colleague just to make sure I say the right thing back as well, if that's okay with you. So if that's either the person can, well, if you've got the question there, so I can respond to it separately. Presume.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. And again, one on price. I don't go into too much detail on the actual pricing. But this is I suppose the impact on pricing on very rare or complex habitat. So it says we're seeing price of watercourse units reaching £200,000 in urban environments, and the price of statutory credits for watercourses is set indicatively at £460,000. So how is this likely to affect the development, which can't avoid impacting on watercourses? Nicola?
That's quite a tricky question, and actually watercourses is one area that we've got very limited experience. So there's been a couple of developments that we've had watercourses on where we've been able to, they were culverted before, and we've been able to enhance them and deliver those gains on site. So we don't have any experience of buying watercourse credits. So I don't know if Nick or Emma might be best placed to pick up the detail around that.
Go on, Nick.
Yeah.
It's
obviously an awkward question.
No, it's not. It's a perfectly reasonable question, and I think so. Part of it is a reflection of the fact that, and partly what Nicola was alluding to, that this is quite new, both for developers and for suppliers as well, in terms of looking at kind of bringing forward opportunities on watercourses. There are projects, I'm aware of, of at least 2 that they have been quite active in creating a lot of watercourse units. They don't happen as projects to be in London. So part of this also goes back to the earlier points about to what extent you can deliver out of area. I would expect, as people become aware of the fact that watercourses are often kind of a feature within certain developments, particularly urban ones, that this is an area that needs to be supplied by the market. I would expect to see greater provision and consequential kind of reduction in price. Yes, they can, however, be expensive habitats to create, and that's that will be part of the equation. But Emma, I don't know if you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. It's definitely a challenging area at the moment. We have many sites where there are opportunities to make enhancement for rivers and therefore generate river units. The way the metric works, you can spend quite a lot of money and effort to enhance a river environment, but it doesn't generate lots and lots of units. So that's why they tend to be expensive. And also the river environment is a difficult environment to control as a landowner. Of course, there are quite a lot of external influences on the river environment. So it's a high risk type of unit for an operator to deliver, because they can't always control the outcomes if there are other landowners are butting up to the banks of the river that are doing not so good things for the river environment. So I guess that's why it is tricky, but I completely agree. I think this is a nascent area. I think there are more opportunities for river enhancement, even sort of low intervention river enhancement, where that price over time will be driven down, and we're already seeing opportunities to do that at Environment Bank. So I'm hopeful for you.
Yeah, I think those tricky habitats is anyway, we're going to have to work with those. I'm just aware of time. We've only got 3 minutes left, and we've got loads and loads of questions here. So I think what we're going to have to do, and there's some very useful ones, which, as Nick said, we'll possibly take away and consider. Actually, we're working with Natural England and DEFRA and other organisations to help develop guidance as well. So queries, there's additional question about stacking as well, which we'll pick up, Nick. Make sure that's captured. And so too, there's some other questions not really aimed to sort of the SME developers. There's questions around tax here, inheritance tax, for example, which are very important. And again, but working with there's a markets advisory group that Nick has set up and runs with amongst landowners and agents, and we can sort of take that back to that group and try to make sure those are answered, at least built into the considerations. But maybe we can just finish. We've got a couple of minutes left, and it's just about sort of overall availability. There's a question from Stuart, says, given biodiversity units are not equivalent or tradable, will there be enough of the right type of units and at the right time for offsite units? It says all credits, but really it's about the availability of units. So maybe just a quick response from each of you about how you feel that the offsite market is going to be functioning at the launch of mandatory BNG. Nicola, so I'll put you on the spot. Do you want to come first?
Yeah, that's fine. I think just from our perspective, what's kind of probably useful to drop into the conversation is that although it's early days yet, mostly we're looking for grassland habitats. So we've not really been looking at all yet for hardly any other. So there are really small numbers of woodland habitats we've been looking for. We've had to, create access and lost a bit of woodland or something like that. But our main requirement at the moment appears to be grassland habitats. So I don't know if that's helpful kick off the discussion.
Thank you. Nick?
So we're seeing a lot of activity by landowners, sort of in this space, and it's great to see Plymouth as the local authority, be the first local authority now to set up their own habitat bank. So work is happening. I think for a lot of habitats, like the example Nicola gave, there should be plenty of supply. I think there will be instances where there are habitats, and we've already touched on rivers. There may be one or two others. Open mosaic is an example as well, where there may be initial kind of challenges, and we're looking how those can be overcome, and looking to make sure, certainly through credits, certain ones that may be more challenging are definitely available for credits, although appreciate people don't want to go there because of the costs. So it's something we're keen to kind of work with suppliers on as well to increase availability on those.
Okay. Thank you, Nick. I'll leave the final word to you then, Emma, which I'm sure you'll say there will be. It's available from Environment Bank. But
yeah, well, I mean, I just reiterate that I think the market is building quite quickly, and that supply side will be there. But I do think in the short term that local supply will be a challenge, and that's where I think we need to embrace cross-boundary selling in the short term until the market's really thriving locally in every local authority. And that's something that the LPAs hopefully will be getting on board with.
Brilliant. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. We're only 1 minute overrun, which, considering the amount of questions we've had, is quite well done. So look, a really insightful conversation. Emma, Nick, Nicola, that's been really useful. Thank you very much. And we will be publishing publishing this video online probably within the next couple of days. Thank you all.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.